This is an ABC podcast.
Hello, Avani Dias here. This episode of Hack, it's a shake-up. So we're talking about big stories from the week, like changes to the history school curriculum. The minister in charge thinks the new one will leave young people with a hatred of Australia, and musicians are taking a stance on vaccines. But Guy Sebastian has pulled back, deciding to sit on the fence. Here's what's coming up.
Hack.
The history curriculum, particularly that for years 7 to 10, paints an overly negative view of Australia.
I would never, ever tell people what to do when it comes to their personal health choices.
I think your phone buzzed just now.
I've got a text!
On Triple J.
Yeah, call me anytime, 1300 0555 36. And as usual, we're joined by two awesome young people. Gordy is with us, Aussie musician and a doctor in Victoria. Gordy, thanks for your time.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by a Camilla O'Man and lawyer, Jeffrey Winters. How's it going, Jeffrey?
Not too bad, thanks, Anthony. How are you?
I'm good. All right, let's get into this curriculum chat.
We want to see a positive and optimistic and patriotic view of our history embedded in the history curriculum.
On Triple J.
Do you feel like you've learned about Australia's history accurately and from all perspectives at school? Lots of researchers and First Nations people would say for a long time the effects of colonisation and European settlement on Indigenous communities has not been taught in the way it should. The Australian curriculum is being changed. That happens every 5 years. And in the new draft, high school history will teach students about those issues, as well as, quote, contested debates about the nature and significance of the Anzac Day legend. So I spoke to the Federal Education Minister, Alan Tudge, on this. He was not into these changes. He says it could leave young Australians leaving school with a hatred of the country. And our interview got people talking all over the country. I want to know what you think. Call in. What do you think of the minister's comments? Did you get a balanced understanding of Australian history at school? 1300 0555 36. Call me.
Hack.
When you look at the history curriculum, it has such a negative view of our history. I'm very concerned about the current draft which the Curriculum Authority has put out. The current draft we would not support.
The latest review by ACAR found the curriculum had long failed in its coverage of Indigenous history.
We're not there just to fly the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander flag. It was as recent as 1967 that we actually became citizens of this country. What can we put in place to make sure that never, ever returns?
It's not because we're this horrible, terrible, racist, sexist country. It's because we're one of the greatest egalitarian free countries in the world.
Just to jump in, a lot of people, Minister, would probably disagree.
I want people to come out having learnt about our country with a love of it rather than a hatred of it.
Hack. On Triple J.
Yeah, call me. Did you get a balanced understanding of history at school? And what do you think of the minister's comments that, you know, this new curriculum could leave young people feeling a hatred towards the country? 1300 0555 36. Jeffrey Winters, keen to hear your thoughts because, you know, you've run for the Liberal Party. Alan Tudge is in the Liberal Party. What do you think about his push here to, I guess, make the curriculum more balanced, according to him?
Well, I think the draft makes the curriculum more balanced. I think when I went through, which unfortunately wasn't as recently as I wish it was, but when I went through school, it certainly had a huge glaring gap when it came to the frontier wars and the real impact, particularly in the first two-thirds of the last century on Aboriginal people, let alone the migrant experience as well. So to correct that gap is excellent. I don't like the notion of a history curriculum being something that makes you want to bounce out of bed being filled with pride or patriotism. If that's what happens, then fantastic. But history is a pretty dark and sometimes depressing thing, and that's okay. And I think actually having a really sober and sometimes somber discussion about those factors in our past is a good thing, and it will probably make people feel more proud to be Australian if they have an honest understanding of themselves as opposed to if they're being taught some sort of, you know, it almost smells of propaganda-ish language. So I don't know. I don't think the minister's completely right in his approach, and it's probably not a very historiography, I should say, like correct way to approach history. It's not meant to be about presenting a narrative. It's about presenting facts and letting people deal with them what they will.
Gordy, what did you learn about sort of First Nations history or things to do with Anzac Day? Did you feel like you got a balanced understanding of it at school?
Look, no, I mean, I think the narrative, you know, going back to invasion versus settlement, invasion wasn't a word that was used when we learnt about the history of our country. It was all about, you know, Captain Cook and white settlement. And those, the choice of those sorts of words does put forward, as was just being said, a narrative. And I think the point of learning history should actually be to learn critical thinking skills. And the fact that the minister was sort of worried about kids being critical, I think completely misses the point, because, learning history is about learning to think critically. And if we can encourage critical thinking in young people, then that, bodes well for all things, particularly for, fixing the racism in this country.
So many people are getting in touch. You can't cancel history, says someone. Another person, we need to tell the truth. The truth should prevail. Someone else, when I went through high school, we covered very little of Australia's true history. If we'd learnt about it properly, then I would have been pretty ashamed, but it's the only way for us to grow as a nation. We have to understand our past to improve our future. That's Alistair in Melbourne. It is interesting, guys, because when we did this interview, I started reflecting on my own, history understanding at school, and we learnt about the stolen generations, but not much else. Where did you guys feel like you started to learn more about Australia's actual past? Because we didn't learn much at school, right? Jeffrey?
I unfortunately think it was not until university, really. I mean, I was lucky enough to both go to university and then do a history minor, but it's kind of a shame that it takes to be in that really small group of people to get to that stage of life, to go to university to learn those things. Of course, I learned lots of things around the dinner table as well. But of course, it's not just the role for parents to teach history. It should be in a really safe academic space like a classroom. So I do think it is interesting on the Anzac point, though. It's something that has always been really emphasised in the Australian history curriculum. And of course, anyone who has a really objective view of the Australian history knows that it's quite a small part, but that sort of patriotism and mateship narrative that they push is obviously anchored to that set of facts, and so it becomes very inflated. I'd be really interested to see how moving forward things like the Afghanistan war and Iraq play into the history and how it's presented. I know for me, I didn't really appreciate just how, wastefully Australian resources, as in human resources, were used by the British in the Turkey campaign. And that's something I learned at university as opposed to school, because at school it was all about this great narrative of us forming ourselves as a nation, when that's not at all what took place. It was a bloodbath, that kind of negligent general decision.
It's weird when you kind of realise that, but the Anzac Day one in particular is a really tricky one, right? Because anytime anyone's sort of come out and said, we did lose the war, maybe we should be discussing that element of it, it kind of gets swept up in this culture wars debate. Gordy, why do you think there is that sort of, difficulty in acknowledging what happened in regards to Anzac Day? It's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, it is tricky, but I think Anzac Day for so long, for, whatever reason, has been sort of so part of, the Australian narrative and the Australian story. And, for some reason, it's so sort of significant in the cultural identity of Australia, or, the cultural identity that I grew up sort of, being familiar with. And I think that, it's through more sort of critical discussions and, watching and reading and, media that has become sort of more truthful and honestly portrayed, facts that might not have been so honestly portrayed, that we've sort of come to different conclusions, and that, as Australia has evolved as a nation, perhaps we're now less reliant on the sort of legend of the Anzac as what defines us as, the more interesting and diverse country that we are. And, that should be what defines us.
That's really interesting. And it can also be both, right? It can be a commemoration of the lives lost, as well as acknowledging what happened. Casey in Victoria, you're a teacher and you teach humanities, so history comes into that, right? What do you think of the minister's comments about, teaching a patriotic view of the country?
Yeah, so currently I'm doing my second year of university for teaching, so not quite a teacher yet. But just learning some of the stuff that I've learnt in my history classes, that I'm doing actual Australian history, it's pretty mind-blowing, everything that gets left out of our humanities in high school. So it's actually created a whole new level of respect for the Indigenous community for me. I'm seeing and hearing all these things that I just never heard about before, and it's really shocking to me. But I obviously I still love Australia and everything, but it was just crazy to hear how much is left out.
Casey, as a teacher, how do you navigate the curriculum? Because, there are bits that are so left out, as you say, and we can all acknowledge that. So when you're actually in the classroom teaching to students, how do you grapple with what you've left out or what the curriculum's left out?
Yeah, so because I haven't quite started my teaching yet.
Sure, sorry. When you will be in the classroom eventually.
I mean, I'm not exactly sure yet. I guess I'll find out. But we've been doing a little bit of looking at the curriculum, and it looks pretty tricky to navigate around and try to meet the curriculum and everything while fitting that all in. So, yeah. I guess I'll just have to...
I mean, I was just about to jump in and say, doesn't this just highlight, though, the role of teachers, which, as much as the minister's comments aren't particularly wonderful, at the end of the day, they set a curriculum and it's the teachers who actually give it the emphasis or the weight or that sort of presentation, and they're really the safeguard between students receiving a biased position and a more objective, critical learning space like what he was talking about. And, you know, Casey's going to be one of those people that provides that platform.
Yeah, Casey, do you think that it doesn't really matter what the minister thinks about the curriculum because you can interpret it when you eventually become a teacher?
I think it probably matters because we have to fit to the curriculum, and I guess, you know, if it is something that's implemented everywhere, then it's not just some schools and some kids learning about it, and it's, you know, Australia or Victoria based, everyone's learning about it, not just the select few.
Yep, that makes sense. Hey, Casey, how do you feel about the fact that your industry has become, I guess, the centre of this sort of culture wars debate? You know, how we feel about Australia and, you know, how we're connected to it.
I think it's probably a good thing because we're teaching the generation that's coming up next, so we can give them the insight that they might need that we haven't received.
Yeah, fair enough. Casey, good luck with your degree. I'm sure you'll be a great teacher going forward.
Thank you.
See ya. So many people getting in touch on this. My grade 4 students learnt about the First Peoples and they're very mature about all aspects. My 10-year-olds respectfully use correct pluralisation and terminology. Wes says our history is horrible and amazing, but people did and are currently doing bad things. Being open and honest is the biggest problem we face. Ashley in Brisbane, what do you think about the minister's comments here? And yeah, these changes to our curriculum.
Honestly, I find it a little bit ridiculous that he would seek to sort of bury what makes such a large part of Australia, because if we didn't acknowledge what's happened in the past, how can we grow and learn from that? How can we teach our kids to be the next generation, the better generation? Like, I want my daughter to learn the truth so that she can make conscious and smart decisions based on that, not just be like, oh, yay, look at us, we're so great because someone tells me we are.
That's a really interesting point. Gordy, what do you think about that? Why are we, as a society, or why are politicians so worried about letting young people think critically and make their own minds up about issues like this?
Yeah, I think it really undermines young people, that the fact that the minister or, you know, the government has this perspective. I think that it's this idea that we need to infantilize everyone, that we need to tell them that, you know, Australia's had this wonderful, happy history, when, you know, that's just not true, and telling that story does a disservice to, you know, to our history and to the nation, and it really sort of undermines any efforts of growth moving forward. So I think that, you know, our governments and our adults and leaders need to expect more from our young people, because young people can deliver.
Totally. Ashley, did you feel patriotic when you left school?
Not particularly. I don't think patriotism was really a part of it. When I think patriotism, I honestly think of the issues that America faces with their gun-toting, flag-waving, always right, never wrong type thing. I feel like I'm proud to be Australian, but I also acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do, and we had a lot of work to do to make things better for our next generation.
Yeah, Jeffrey, how do you feel about that?
You know, I kind of agree. I don't know why patriotism is meant to be a product of the classroom. I don't mind patriotism being a product of the sporting field or the fashion industry or the media or success of individuals, but I never personally felt a classroom as a place where you're developing your patriotism. I think, like Gordy keeps pointing out, it's a place to develop your mind and be critical. And the minister's a politician, and it makes a lot of sense, and it fits a lovely, you know, Good Friday afternoon ABC liberal bashing narrative today. He's kind of out there like that.
Every time, Jeffrey, we can't have you on without the ABC criticism.
No, I love Auntie. I was about to say, surely it's places like the public broadcaster, and I think particularly to say SBS, who has that specific focus on multiculturalism and presenting the many faces that is Australia. It's those places where I like to develop my patriotism, but out of a very critical and often conflicted narrative, not just some really shiny, I just think patriotism is such a weird word to weave into this conversation.
Yeah, it is weird. Hey, Gordy, before we move on, I'm pretty interested that this has become such a political issue. Sometimes you look at things and you're like, how did this become so political? Is the curriculum being used as a political football here? What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I mean, kind of. I think that, the state of the world has sort of never seemed so far left and far right. And, the caller before was, talking about America where it's even more divisive. But, I think that, the government, not to be a liberal basher, but the government, does have to be careful of that kind of divisive language, using things like patriotism, because then anyone who sort of argues that, we do need modifications to the curriculum, that makes you anti-patriotic, I just don't think that's sort of healthy language in the debate.
Yeah, super
interesting. The binary
interesting.
then is that you're a bad Aussie, and that's not, you shouldn't be described like that just because you question something.
Totally. Ashley, thanks so much for calling in. You are listening to Hack, completely unbiased radio station. Don't care what any of these guys say. But let's talk about vaccinating the country and what musicians are doing about it.
If they say that the vaccine will help us get back on the road to recovery, you should do it.
On Triple J.
Yeah, my name's Avani Dias. We're hanging out with Jeffrey Winters, lawyer and Aussie musician, and Dr. Gordy. And how good would it be to go to a big festival right now or just see your favourite artists touring? More than 400 people in the Australian music industry, artists like Flume, Amy Shark and G-Flip, festival organisers, labels, promoters and more have joined a campaign called Vax the Nation, and they're encouraging people to get vaccinated to reach 80% of the country jabbed so the live industry can get back on the road. One very prominent artist who at first seemed to be a part of the campaign was Guy Sebastian, but he removed a Vax the Nation post from his social media and shared a video saying it's not his role to be telling people what to do with their personal health. Want to know what you think? Do you want musicians and prominent figures to take a stance on vaccination? Should the Guy Sebastians get off the fence? 1300 055 36. Call me.
Hack. There is a new campaign that was launched today by over 400 artists and entertainment groups asking you to get vaccinated.
The statewide lockdown.
The campaign was posted to my page without my direct involvement, and I would never, ever tell people what to do when it comes to their personal health choices.
Grow a set, Guy, and don't let those who are perhaps on your website saying, I'll never listen to you again, won't buy your CDs, won't go on Spotify ever again. Grow a set, mate.
I signed up to a national plan to vaccinate our nation, not a national plan to vaccinate Sydney.
Hack. Triple J. Yeah, call me. Do you want musicians and prominent figures to take a stance on vaccines? Or, is Guy Sebastian fair enough in not wanting to be open about this? 1300 055 36. Gordy, you're in this campaign. You're a doctor in Victoria. You're seeing everything happening every day in front of you, but you're also a musician who should be on tour right now. Why did you join the campaign to begin with?
Yeah, look, there's a few things going on here, and obviously like a complex issue with some of those sound bites. But fundamentally, people need to get vaccinated. Music industry aside, people need to be vaccinated so that we can get out of this pandemic, so that we can get out of lockdown, so that we can, move on and become a functioning, healthy society again and minimise death rates. And the music industry, often gets behind social causes of all kinds. When there were Australian bushfires, they were hosting fundraisers. The list kind of goes on. But obviously this issue is particularly close to home. And while a lot of people might say, musicians and artists shouldn't get involved in social issues, this one has, hits very close to home, because while vaccination rates remain low, we can't do our jobs. So obviously we are going to be out there beating the drum to encourage people to be vaccinated, because until, the large proportion of the population is vaccinated, our industry will remain in crisis.
Totally. And Gordy, you're seeing this unfold day to day in hospitals. What's that been like?
Yeah, so last month, I was supposed to be on tour with Paul Kelly, and I was supposed to play at Vivid at the Opera House, and all of those shows were cancelled, and 3 months of my income that would have allowed me to survive for the rest of the year was just completely wiped out overnight. I'm very lucky that I have another job that I can go to, and so I essentially started taking up shifts in emergency departments. So a couple of weeks ago, I spent a week doing the night shift in Mildura emergency department. Next week, I'm going to Shepparton emergency department. And, there I spend 10 to 12 hours fully kitted out in level 4 PPE, which means an N95 mask, goggles, face shield, full plastic gown. You can't kind of eat or drink while you're working. You can't really pee. You end up drenched in sweat, and you're going in and out of these rooms all day where it's people, it says on their form, query COVID, and you're like, well, I hope they didn't have COVID and I hope I didn't get it from them. So it's a pretty, it's a pretty bizarre and awful universe.
Yeah, and how do you feel then seeing Guy Sebastian being so iffy about committing to this campaign you're a part of?
Oh, look, pissed off, to be honest. I think
not about the vaccination situation, just about him.
I don't like to sort of haul people across the coals, and in any other circumstance, I think people's rights are obviously so important. That's human rights are paramount, but I think that what is being missed here is that it is a public health crisis. It's not about personal health, and people need to put the needs of their community above their own needs. And, we're all sacrificing personal freedoms every day by being in lockdown, and the way to get out of that is through vaccination. So I think it's just not the time to sit on the fence for this issue. And people that have public profiles, who have a big, audience through social media, using language like personal health choices, I just think, it's not my role to do that. It actually is your role as a public figure to go out and encourage people to be vaccinated so that we can all, get back to living our lives.
Jeffrey, where do you stand on this? Because Guy Sebastian made this post about vaccination and then he pulled it back, but he went even further. He actually apologised for making the post and said, it's not my role to be telling you what to do when it comes to your health. What do you reckon?
The whole thing just felt a bit weird. I mean, for starters, Ray Hadley referred to buying CDs, so it felt like 2002 was back because both Guy Sebastian was relevant and CDs were being purchased. So it was kind of nice and kind of
nostalgic
back on that front. Of course, he has every right to express a view and hold that view, but I completely back Gordy in the sense that when you have a public profile, all the benefits that come with that also come with some responsibilities, and this one should be pretty clear. I also just don't understand how large his followership must be that they've all turned on him and he felt the need to do this. There's something missing for me. I don't quite understand what prompted him to be so, as you say, not just withdraw the post, but then really go and clarify it. Also, just get better staff. If you've got people posting on Instagram stuff you don't like,
there should have been a discussion.
Did you miss that Zoom call? I don't know.
Missed the email.
I don't know what's going at Team Sebastian, but something's up.
I'll happily take your password, Jeffrey, and start posting on your behalf. I think it'd be good.
I'm not going down this pathway with you.
Hannah in Brisbane's call. What do you think about Guy Sebastian's flip this week on the vaccination campaign?
I was just saying that I feel like as Australians we hugely look up to athletes, but also a big part of our culture is our music. And if we've got kids who are looking up to athletes, we also have a lot of kids and teens looking up to musicians. So it's just as much. If you have the power to use that and promote good stuff, there's a lot of audience looking up to you. So you might as well do the right thing and that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Hannah. What if a musician, your favourite musician, posted something political that was actually really against what you believed in? Would that kind of make you go off them?
Yeah, that would, because I feel like the same as if you follow a certain brand or whatever, if they promote something that's not, I would try and remove that from my life, because even if it's only my $1 that goes towards it, it's my $1 that's going towards something that's not necessarily what I believe in. So yeah.
Yeah, Gordy, how do you navigate that as a musician when you are choosing which political stances to get behind? Do you think about whether it will annoy parts of your fan base?
Look at Kanye, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think it always matters. But look, I would never sort of make a decision about the way I think about something or a political stance based on whether I think it would alienate fans. If I put out a tweet promoting vaccination and 100 people unfollow me because they think, I don't believe in vaccination, then like, honestly, good riddance. I just, like, on an issue of vaccination, I feel very strongly about that. But in terms of other political issues, like, you know, I think that there should be sort of healthy debate on issues should be allowed. I don't think that, you know, people should just stop listening to one another simply because they disagree on an issue. But I think that this particular issue is just, you know, such a once in a lifetime thing that is completely destroying the lives of so many people that I think it's not a time for debate.
That is an interesting point you made just before. Like, which part of Guy Sebastian's fan base are actually anti-vaxxers? Like, is that his...
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, how many teenage girls out there are like, well, I'm glad he stood up for that because I haven't heard enough. I haven't heard enough of it from my people in the press. It's like, really?
Yeah, it's super interesting. Hannah, thanks so much for calling in. Keen to go to Courtney on the Gold Coast. How do you feel about musicians leading the vaccine advice?
Hi guys, how are you?
Good.
Look, I don't believe that they should be leading the vaccine advice. You know, I feel like maybe it's a little bit, it's, you know, like as Gordy said, it's a once in a lifetime thing. We've never seen anything like this. The fact that they have to get behind the vaccine rollout to try and, you know, promote it in a positive light, I feel like the government haven't done enough. The narrative that they have put out there hasn't been positive or factual. It's been a bit scaremongering. You know, people are hesitant about getting the vaccine. I understand that. I am fully vaccinated myself because that's what I believe should be happening. You know, I am all pro-choice as well, but I just feel like people just need to, you know, put a little bit of a critical thinking hat on, get all the information, and make an informed decision. I don't think that there is enough factual information out there. People need a friendly face to go and talk to air their concerns.
Yeah, and obviously musicians can be really good role models to do that in a really good way. They're not, you know, weird websites that are just on the internet. You would hope that you could trust them, but then I guess some of them you can't. But it is interesting with the Guy Sebastian issue, right? I guess the flip side of it is it has been a really hard couple of years for musicians. Is it fair enough that you would want to keep all your fans happy and keep things just kind of non-controversial as Guy Sebastian may think it? What do you reckon, Gordy?
I mean, I just think you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit because, like, ultimately, you know, ultimately we need to be vaccinated so that, you know, you can, like, reach your fans, so that you can make a living, so that you can do all those things. So coming out as anti-vax to, well, you know, sorry, not anti-vax, but sort of coming out, you know, maybe not totally in favour, on the fence. I think it's doing, you know, such a large disservice that, you know, it's not worth kind of keeping whatever amount of fans that you might temporarily lose because they're a bit annoyed at you that you came out as pro-vaccination.
Yeah, so many people are texting in. Chris in Brisbane says, I absolutely disagree with Guy, but he is entitled to his own view. Attacking him for his view risks undermining the positive messaging the artists who are on board are putting out there. Guy's just saying he doesn't want to use his position to push people. It's his choice. Why are people so angry at him? That's another texter. Someone else, if you have a platform, you should use it to promote vaccination. Jeffrey, the big question for you is, you have been in politics for a while. How do you feel about musicians getting in your space?
Well, they say politics is show business for ugly people, and I think it's nice to have a few prettier people in the business. So, I mean, yes, I think, it's obviously not the sole reason why Gordy's so pro-vaccine, but of course you hear about her not being able to have her concert at the Opera House, which I would have loved to go to, all of those things. Maybe if Guy Sebastian had a few more tours, he'd be more pro-vaccine, because then more people would turn up. But, you know, it is interesting the musicians who are not anti-vaxxers but on the fence, because surely of all the industries that benefit from us being back out and about and congregating in large groups inside arenas and so on, it's musicians. So I really do find it, at least commercially, completely incongruous for him to be,
totally
equivocating on this.
Maybe you can you can flip it and your advocacy can be pro-Gordy, you know? She's pro-vaxxer or pro-Gordy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Gordy should be the next judge on The Voice, right? That's where you're at next, Gordy.
Oh, my God. I'll practice spinning in my chair.
Guys, we're going to hit the news. But Jeffrey Winters, thanks so much for coming on the show, as usual.
Thank you.
And Gordy, thank you as well. And thanks for all the amazing work you're doing out there in all the hospitals.
Thanks, Avani.
And thank you for listening, and mainly as well to the amazing Hack team, our executive producer, Megan Woods, radio producer, Serge Negus, and the amazing reporters. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Hack. I'll catch you on the next one.